On your Monday episode of Locked On Raptors, the goal for this summer seemed pretty clear for the front office of the Toronto Raptors. Turn the page from a pretty miserable couple seasons. Did they do that successfully? We talk about that and more coming up on today's show. Thanks for hanging.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Monday, September the 16th, as we return to daily episodes, baby. And I am your host, Sean Woodley. Been covering the Toronto Raptors now for going on 11 seasons on various platforms. You can follow all my work over on the really bad website that sucks at Woodley Sean. You can find the show on Instagram at Locked On Raptors, and you can join us, of course, in the Locked On Raptors Discord server. That is the place to be. It's the link in the description of the podcast. It's free to join, and it's a great little listener community we got building around the show. Would love to see some fresh faces in there for a new season as well. Of course, you can find the show in all your podcast apps of choice. We're on YouTube. Follow, subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend. Always appreciated when you support the show on the apps of your choosing in the way those apps tell you to support the shows you like. All right, today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And we will get started here on a Monday edition of the show, doing a bit of a temperature check. I put a call out yesterday in the Locked On Raptors Discord for just sort of big picture ideas that people wanted me to cover in the lead up to this coming season. And one of the things that got suggested was a sort of look at the front office, the last few years, how things have gone, how we've gotten to this point. And I'm going to spin that. I'll get into what what lovely Discord user Mystical Illusion asked about specifically in there. But I want to spend today just kind of taking stock of, did the Raptors front office do what they set out to do this offseason? Was it a successful offseason? What happens if the sort of mistakes continue to pile up as we get into a new year? What happens if things go poorly? The room that you might have, the mileage you may have to give the front office runway to fix the mistakes they've made, and ultimately some things they can do this year to sort of earn back the good favor of a fan base that I think at this point is understandably pretty split on what this front office is capable of. And look, there's all sorts of reasons why they got themselves into the predicament they did with Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby. And before that, Fred VanVleet. There have been plenty of mistakes along the way. But I also think it's good to sort of take stock and sort of just get an idea of where they sit right now, which all told, I think is a pretty good place in terms of comparison points to where they were a year ago or 2 years ago. I think finally the page has in fact been turned on the post-championship era. Only Chris Boucher remains from the championship team, and we're now very much into the Scottie Barnes, Emmanuel Quickley, Jakob Poeltl, RJ Barrett era of the Raptors. And I think they continued over the course of the offseason, did Masai, Ujiri, and Bobby Webster and the rest of the staff, the sort of process of flipping the page and sort of cleaning the slate. There was a lot to clean up. There have been a lot of mistakes in recent years, which we'll go and revisit coming up in another segment. But as far as this offseason, kind of defining a grade, giving an evaluation of how things went, I don't think it was perfect, but I do think they did achieve the main goal, which was to turn that page, to sort of very declaratively say, this is what the team is about now. This is how the team is going to look. This is how we want to play. And obviously we have to see it in practice on the floor. But I think the shape of a team that makes basketball sense is here. It's not perfect, which we'll get to, but I do think a few things they did this summer are pretty clear wins, pretty clear, smart decisions. Number one, I think they were totally right in sort of the Emmanuel Quickley decision to give him the 5 years, $32.5 million a year. Everyone who listens to this podcast every day knows I'm extremely bullish on Emmanuel Quickley. I think he's got a lot of juice as a lead guard, and I think his playmaking in particular is something that's really going to stand out this season. And I think $32.5 million for a guy who I think already has the sort of goods of like an average starting point guard in the NBA. That's average starting point guard money right now. That's like middle of the pack money right now. I think that contract is going to age wonderfully for the Toronto Raptors. It's probably going to be an undervalued deal for Emmanuel Quickly, which, hey, I mean, you're not going to sneeze at $160 million locked in. But, I think he's going to end up being pretty grossly underpaid, in terms of the market by the end of this contract in 5 years' time. And I think the Raptors are really smart to lock him up at this number for the next 5 years and pair him with Scottie Barnes, who, despite their chemistry issues last year, is someone who's a very clear fit with Quickly. And I think their skills complement each other super well. And hopefully some more runway together this summer, where it seems like they spent a ton of time together, can be helpful to sort of massaging that chemistry and that connection, because that is kind of the connection upon which this whole thing rests. It's a big lofty set of expectations for Quickly, but I think that was a clear home run, and defining what this team is going to be, having a running mate for Scottie Barnes in stone. You know who it's going to be. It's Scottie, it's Quickly, then you figure out the rest around them. I think that's just a smart move when it comes to moving on to this next era. I also think they did a pretty decent job of building a roster that fits around Scottie Barnes. They didn't do that for the first few years of his career, for sure. And, I think I have my misgivings about the Pascal Siakam trade and how it all went down. We'll get into that, I'm sure, coming up. But overall, they've built a roster that has more shooting, that has a little extra sort of creative ball handling, where they're not going to force Scottie Barnes to be this creative engine that I'm just not sure he can really be. Or at least they'll put him into sort of more advantageous positions to do said creation, or not have to be everything all at once for the Raptors offense. I think the Quickly thing, the RJ Barrett fits really nice. I think the Grady Dick selection and presumably them starting him this year is a really important thing for Scottie Barnes. I think those two guys can have a really long-standing connection as well, in terms of how their skills, complement and offset one another. I think they're on the way here. I think Jakob Poeltl now all of a sudden makes a lot more sense on a Scottie Barnes team because of the way the rest of the roster is constructed. Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby, Scottie Barnes, those three guys plus Jakob Poeltl was a really tricky fit, especially without a lead guard with any kind of pull-up shooting juice, Dennis Schroeder. And I think now it makes a lot more sense. I think Scottie Barnes is like a stretch four type in the starting lineup, who's going to, space. If he's not creating, he's going to space. He's going to create from the perimeter as like a slasher, as a secondary creator type. When Quickly maybe has the run of the offense, like I think the fit there with Jakob Poeltl, assuming Scottie can replicate his 3-point shooting on catch and shoots from last year, where he was 38.5% on like four times a game. Pretty nice stuff. If he can do that, or even get close to that again this year, I think the fit with Jakob Poeltl makes a ton of sense. I think overall, the team, the way it's been assembled now, you can have your misgivings about the Jakob Poeltl trade originally, but I do think the roster unquestionably is now set up to optimize Jakob Poeltl. And I do think by the end of this season, that trade will be looked at in a bit of a different light. Yeah, the circumstances of how it happened and the fallout of the Fred VanVleet departure and the utter lack of roster cohesion last year all made that trade look a lot worse. And there are plenty of people who will never think that trade is good. But I do think we see a really good Jakob Poeltl season that at least sheds a bit more of a positive light on that deal. And I think that, again, sort of goes to the way they've constructed this roster. I think the Kelly Olynyk addition kind of gets lumped in to the offseason moves as well. You can quibble with the contract, but the fit of the skills, the spacing, the shooting he brings, the passing, I think that's a really nice thing to have on a team with Jakob Poeltl as well, assuming they're not playing Kelly Olynyk at center. And of course, it wasn't all perfect this offseason, which we'll get to in a second as well. I also love what they did at the draft in terms of making something from nothing. They didn't have a ton to work with. They had that 31st overall pick. They had the Jacoby Walter pick. I like the Walter pick. I've come around on it more. I think his rim pressure is going to be a real thing that they can lean on as like a real skill that adds, a valuable skill to this roster, and the sort of complement of skills they have on hand with their guys. I think he's going to fit well with Scottie Barnes, assuming the shooting comes along, which I feel like it will. I think him and Grady Dick could have a really nice on-court synergy as well, with the way they can kind of fly around off the ball in sort of dueling split actions and all this type of stuff. I think there's a lot to be done there with Jacoby Walter, the way they restocked the cupboard with young dudes and, high upside plays, Rashamshe and more NBA ready guys like Jamal Shed and Jonathan Mobo. Walter feels like maybe kind of in the middle. I think they did a good job of sort of getting towards a place where they can reestablish that sort of developmental pipeline that made this such a successful franchise as well. They got back to their roots with what they did at the draft, while also adding Davion Mitchell for basically nothing, as well as the Blazers' second round pick for next year, which is not a small deal. I think that pick is going to be something that we talk about quite a bit this year, whether it's, just kind of drafting someone in the range that the Blazers will be, which will be high, very high in the 30s, or low 30s, whatever it is, very early in the second round, or maybe as a trade chip to go and find another second draft type guy, which we'll get to coming up later on as well. Again, it wasn't all perfect. I didn't love them picking up Bruce Brown's option. I think that was not the best decision considering the flexibility not picking him up would have afforded them, but there's still time to salvage that one too. I'll withhold full judgment on the Bruce Brown of it all until after the deadline, and we see what the Raptors are able to do with him. Maybe he plays himself into being worth a first round pick. Maybe that's a long shot, but it's on the table among the range of outcomes. And I'll grant a little bit of, all right, we'll wait and see on that one. But I didn't love the decision. I think also, they have risked this season becoming another abject lost disaster season because of the lack of insulation at some key positions. There's no backup center on this team who could theoretically slide in and be a decent approximation of Jakob Poeltl. If he were to go down, there's no backup point guard on this team, or at least not a readily visible one. Maybe Davion Mitchell moves into that role. I don't think I have super high hopes for that. But if Quickly goes down, or you just need a little extra guard playmaking juice, they don't have it. There's not a ton of insulation there either. Yes, they can do the creation by committee thing with Barnes and Olynyk and Poeltl and Quickly on down the line. Bruce Brown even a little bit too. But, the lack of a backup point guard could be a problem for this team. Maybe one rises up. Maybe Bruce Brown looks comfortable in that role. We'll see. But the lack of a backup center, certainly, if things go poorly this year and an injury happens and it becomes another rudderless mess of a team, I think then that really starts to sort of chip away at the reputation even further than it's already been chipped away at for the front office. And I want to get into a second here. It's sort of a look back on how we got here, where the Raptors have really hurt themselves along the way to this point, and the kind of runway they should be given to rectify their mistakes. We'll get into that coming up here in just 1 second. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, the single best sportsbook in North America. You've heard us talk about FanDuel a lot here, and we've got something a little bit different for you right now. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every single regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game all year long. All you got to do is get a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel any time. Of course, FanDuel has all kinds of ways to go wager on the upcoming NBA season if that's what you want to do as well. Futures, over-unders on wins. You got awards picks. Who's going to win the whole damn thing? It's all there for you to peruse over at FanDuel and their very easy-to-use app and website. Just visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook, FanDuel, official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. Back at it here, talking about the Toronto Raptors front office and runways and fallow periods and getting out of fallow periods and giving space to rectify mistakes. This comes from the question that was posed by Mystical Illusion in our Discord chat, essentially asking, did the Toronto Raptors front office screw the team by not tearing things down the second they got Scottie Barnes and it seemed like he might be a franchise player? And no, I don't think they did. I think that's like a pretty joyless way to think about and watch sports. Like, oh, well, you gotta tear everything down. Like, no, like there can be middle grounds. There can be different pathways to success. You can have some imagination. It doesn't always have to be, well, new thing comes along, must tear down and build around that. Like, there are ways to thread the needle. The Raptors just did a really bad job of threading the needle. And I'm not going to begrudge them for some of the stuff we saw over the last few years. They've made some mistakes. There's no doubt. And look, I begrudge them for a lot. We'll get into what I begrudge them for, but I'm never going to begrudge them for having an emotional attachment to guys who won a championship for the team and then put in the 2019-20 season, which was an absolutely thrilling time of your life type experience. One of the most enjoyable basketball teams I think any of us will ever watch. That 1920 team, title defense team, was incredible. And I don't blame the Raptors front office for wanting to make it work with the guys who are part of that team in that era of Raptors basketball. I can't get there. I think, it's just what are we doing sports for if not to get attached to guys? And yeah, maybe it's the job of the front office to not have that attachment. I understand if you're a team that's never won anything, being like, okay, what are we really attached to these guys for? But the Raptors won the whole thing. I think the leeway and the justification for giving those guys the runway to try to make something happen with this core was totally fine. And just like, I would never, like, I'm never going to go back and say, oh, they got Scottie Barnes, they should have torn it down right away. I don't think that's how teams with like any kind of grasp of like the fan experience of the sport go and operate. I think that would have been really upsetting to see them just tear the whole thing down. That said, the Scottie Barnes thing clearly totally messed their brains up for a little while there. And I get it, right? Like, you get this talent. He's maybe not quite ready to take up the mantle from your existing guys. The fit's not super good. So you got to get creative and kind of strange with how you make it work. You're playing kind of unorthodox style, and your lineups are bizarre, and you're not prioritizing certain positions because maybe they have less utility on a team with all these wings you have. Like, look, I get it, right? Like, Vision 6-9, I've said this before, but wanting to do Vision 6-9, I don't think it was necessarily wrong. I think they were maybe early on it. I think also they didn't account for scarcity of guys who are 6'9" in range. You can play all over the place and, provide two-way production. There's just not that many players alive who can do that, and compiling them all on your own roster is pretty unrealistic in a league where player acquisition is a lot based in luck. And so, no, I like the Scottie thing. They tried, they got weird, and then I think they got too cute with it. And I think the Pascal Siakam thing, like, if we're talking things I will begrudge them for, trading Pascal Siakam at the absolute nadir of his value after, kind of dancing around whether they would keep him or not, talking about him being a guy they want to win with and go to war with, and then completely reneging on all of that. I think not reading the market well on what they'd be able to get back for him. Like, they screwed up the Pascal Siakam thing, no doubt. Maybe they're better off with it now being clear and the question being answered and the uncertainty that hung over last season being gone. But there's no doubt they screwed that up big time. I think they screwed up the evaluation that went into the Jakob Poeltl trade. We've litigated this a million times. They totally screwed that up. That said, I do think, again, there's a world in which a year from now, we're all kind of maybe not feeling so bad about the Jakob Poeltl trade because he makes sense in the context of this team now. And so, and look, it's not even that they traded for Jakob Poeltl that I'm mad about. It's that they went into that season after 2021-22 where they were this surprise, fun upstart team and did nothing to address the roster holes until February of that season, when it was clear for 2/3 of that year that not having addressed the roster hole at center was a huge problem and they should have done something about it in the summer. They should have just traded for Jakob Poeltl in the summer, and no one's upset about that, even with the fit being a little bit sticky. It just, to me, there's stuff in the Jakob Poeltl logic that makes sense. I think the timeline of it all was whack and all of that. But again, I'm happy Yak's in the team now, and I think he's in for a big time year. I just think, look, it's a tough stretch for any front office that they've gone through here, from the Tampa thing to winning the championship and trying to sort of, again, honor the dudes who were on that team, try to make it work with them. You get this guy who falls in your lap in the form of Scottie Barnes. Like, I think any front office confronted with the decisions the Raptors have had to make over the last 5 years probably would have made a lot of the same mistakes. It's kind of an unprecedented, very strange run of events that the Raptors have gone through over the last 5 years. And I don't know if there's any one right way to have navigated it all. I just think it's now time to maybe put to bed all the stuff behind, and, did they screwed up by not tearing it down? Like, it doesn't matter now, right? Like, Scottie Barnes on the team, he's paid, he's going to be here for a while. Quickly's here too. A really nice move, I think, for OG Anunoby, a guy who was going to walk for nothing had they not traded him. I think for the circumstances, they've found themselves in a decent spot here, but like, it can't stop here. They have to keep sort of moving on to this new era and sort of getting those little wins on the margins, which they just kind of didn't have for a couple years there. And look, every front office is going to miss on the margins too, right? Like, I feel like being in your own little bubble where you're watching a team every day, you just kind of assume, well, if the mistakes they're making, no one else would make. But no, like lots of teams screw up as they go through their team build process. And I think, especially when there's no blueprint for how to handle the situations that's been thrown at you, which the Raptors between 2019, when Kawhi Leonard left, and this past season when Pascal Siakam got traded, like, I don't understand how anyone could have a blueprint for how to manage all of the things that took place there. Yeah, in hindsight, the Thad Young trade looks bad or whatever, or although it kind of looks like nothing right now. It's just like such a nothing burger to me to not be. I'm not ever going to get upset about it, but I know some people are. The Jakob Poeltl trade, yeah, it was bad, but we can't sit here and dwell on it because, like, what is that going to do about anything? And Jakob Poeltl's good and on the team now. That's nice. Like, that's not a bad thing that he's here. You can dwell on the past and all of that, but I do think it really is now about how do they go about rectifying these mistakes they've made? Mistakes that, again, I think most front offices would have run into managing this team and these circumstances over the last 5 seasons. And this is where the idea of runway comes in, right? How much runway do you give? How much are you comfortable giving to Masai Ujiri and Bobby Webster to get this thing back on track? And look, again, I think they've started pretty well with what they did this offseason. Not perfect by any means, but they made some good steps in the right direction. Again, got back to their roots a little bit. And maybe there's a world in which 2 years from now, all the young guys they took in this year's draft are looking like that shadow core of dudes who either are main contributors to a good team or guys you trade for upgrades. Like, that's still going to be borne out in the next couple seasons, but I think they got off to a good start with it. But, things go really poorly this season. What happens, right? Like, how much runway is there if there are bad decisions at the deadline? If Bruce Brown doesn't get traded for any kind of reasonable return, or sort of, and maybe not reasonable, but like the word I'm looking for is like valuable, I guess is the word I'm looking for there. Like, if they can't get something for Bruce Brown of note, if they, if something happens where Davion Mitchell looks okay, not great, but they lock him in on a 4-year contract for some reason, like there's all sorts of things that can go wrong here to maybe suggest that, okay, all these mistakes of the last 5 years weren't circumstantial. They've kind of lost the fastball. I think we're probably now into that point with the page having been turned to the Scottie Barnes era, where mistakes made from here on out, like just glaringly confounding decisions made from here on out, probably are things that you look at as reasons to maybe move on from somebody. And look, I have no idea how to judge the job security of Masai Ujiri and Bobby Webster. I think Masai Ujiri basically has as much job security as anyone in the sport, which I think is good and right. I think he's the kind of guy you want leading your franchise. I know Bobby's his guy. I have no idea what it would take for a change to be made there. Obviously, the Rodgers of it all kind of hangs over all this too, and the Larry Tannenbaum eventual departure from MLSC. Maybe that plays into the sort of politics at the top with Masai, but I do think there's a world in which if things go really terrible this year, if it's another disaster year, if there's big mistakes made, then depending on why the reasons for that, like if everyone just gets hurt, I don't know what he's supposed to do. But like if there's on court, the chemistry issues, that the coaching staff's maybe not looking like they have it, all this stuff. Like if this year is bad, I think it will certainly be right for the front office, for fans to start really questioning the front office and Bobby Webster in particular. And look, I'm never going to call for people's jobs. I think it's dumb. I also think I'd rather have stability and have a front office that is given runway to fix mistakes. And, especially when they have a track record of being as literally as successful as you can be, I'm always going to opt for patience and runway and stability. But I think another disaster season this year, that championship gets further and further in the rear view every year. And it'll be 6 years this June since they last won the title. If this is another disaster year where things don't look like they're on the right track, or it looks like the bets on Quickly and Barnes were maybe not very well placed bets, then certainly I think that's when the seat temperature starts to rise for Masai, Webster on down the line. We'll come back on the other side, get into some stuff I'd like to see them do this year to kind of continue turning the page, stuff they can do to kind of continue to just improve the situation, even if the team is not going to be all that especially good. We'll get to that coming up here in just one sec. So what are we looking for out of this Raptors front office this season. Of course, like we're not going to see much in the first handful of months because that's how it goes, right? Trade season is January, February. We'll see with Bruce Brown and other trade candidates. Like that's obviously a big part of the grade the front office is going to get this year will be what happens with Bruce. What else do they do at the trade deadline? I do think there are a few things that they got to try to do, a few things they got to try to avoid this year. Number one for me is I think they have to avoid their urge to strip down further. I know there's a loud section of the fan base that is pounding the table for Jakob Poeltl to get traded if things aren't going well this year. I think that would be kind of malpractice, honestly. I think we're not at the point with this team where they can be taking further steps back. It'd be nice if they could. It would be awesome. But contract timelines are a thing. Scottie Barnes, Emmanuel Quickly, already on their second contracts, or at least Scottie will be a year from now. RJ is inching closer and closer by the year to being done. His second contract, like it's go time to an extent here, right? It's not go time in that they have to go and trade for an upgrade, a win now deal right now or anything like that. That would be kind of bad if they went and did that at this year's deadline, barring some really surprising start to the season, of course. But I don't want to see no Brandon Ingram rentals or anything like that. But I do think this season should be about building yourself up for next summer to be a summer of aggression, to be a summer of trying to go and add a legitimate piece. And maybe that piece just comes through the draft, right? Maybe this team's just not that good. I don't think this team is going to be bottom of the league bad. I think we've covered this quite a bit. Like the Wizards, the Pistons, the Nets, the Bulls, I think are all obviously worse teams than the Toronto Raptors. Now it's a flattened lottery world, and so maybe they're the 8th worst team in the league and get some luck. That would be awesome to get an Ace Bailey or a Dylan Harper or hell, a Cooper Flagg on this team. You'll take that and you'll laugh. But I don't think you can go into this season with that being the intention because to me, priority number 1, 2, and 3 has to be developing the good, important young players you already have. It's fun to fantasize about who you might have, but you can't plan for these things. In the very best case scenario, if you're the worst team in the NBA, you have a 14% chance of getting Cooper Flagg. Your life is probably not getting changed by the draft lottery. It's just what the odds tell you. And so you got to just first sort of foster and nurture what you have in-house. And what the Raptors have in-house is pretty interesting, right? Scottie Barnes, I think, can be the best player on a very good playoff team. Maybe not a true blue inner circle contender on his own without more help, but which players can? There's like 7 players alive who are like that. I don't think Scottie Barnes is one of the 7. I do think Scottie Barnes is one of the 15 to 16 best players in the league who can carry a team to the postseason just by being the best player. With, of course, a nice supporting cast that fits and is harmonious and all of that, which I think they're on track to having. I think, you can be all like, well, hey, they got to be really bad. They got to trade. They got to tank. They got to trade Poeltl. They got to go and get Cooper Flagg. Well, like, again, you're probably not getting him. And what happens if you don't? And you've traded Jakob Poeltl. These guys are a year closer to free agency, a year further into not winning any games or playing competitive basketball. In theory, if you're trading Jakob Poeltl, things have gone really awry before the deadline, and you're wasting again the last couple of months of the season playing non-basketball. There is attrition to that, considering last season was a totally lost season. Outside of Scottie Barnes taking the jump and getting Quickly and Barrett on the team, we learned nothing about this team last year. We learned nothing about how they fit, how they're going to play, what their strengths and weaknesses are going to be. They have to figure that stuff out this year. They just have to. This is what this season's about. It's about information gathering and then making the next moves to respond to whatever information you gather. They're still probably going to have a pretty decent lottery pick one way or another. I think there's a very narrow range of outcomes for this team. Basically, 10th or 11th in the Eastern Conference feels like, if I'm betting against like those 2 spots versus the field of spots they could finish in, I'm taking 10th or 11th for sure. And so that's going to put them in the back range of the top 10, late lottery. Like, this is a deep draft. You can get a helpful, useful player with whatever that. You have your Blazers pick if you want to trade up a few spots. Like, there's avenues here. You got the Pacers pick down the line too. There's ways in which you can turn the 11th pick in this year's draft into something really meaningful for your team, whether it's you're taking somebody or you're packaging it with other stuff to go and make that big upgrade that I think the Raptors got to be on the lookout for this summer. So yeah, that's really number 1 for me. Avoid the urge to totally tear it down. Without Jakob Poeltl, this team has no backbone. This team has no way to play proper, developmentally conducive basketball. I'll keep on pounding this drum. It's stupid to trade Jakob Poeltl at this point if you're this team. They just need to play competent basketball, and they can play competent basketball without ruining their lottery odds entirely. That's the beauty of this season. You can just let it ride, and they're not deep enough. They're still not fully developed enough when it comes to like Grady Dick and even Quickly and Barrett and even Barnes to really go and win a whole lot of games. If they do win a whole lot of games, great. That means something really good is cooking here. But I don't think you can just go into this season if you're the front office with designs on playing the lotto game. And I don't think they are. So off to a good start there. We'll see how things develop. And yeah, maybe they lose, 15 of their first 20 games or whatever it is. They have a really tough start to the season. That's possible. I still think it'd be real stupid of them to go and sort of pull the chute early and waste away another, like a lot of really valuable developmental time for guys who have not played a whole lot of time together. It just matters. You got to have continuity. You got to have reps within a system. They have to like build a defense and like figure out what they want their identity to be on that end. If you don't have Jakob Poeltl, you can't do that. And look, it's one thing if you're trading Jakob Poeltl for an ironclad, no doubt solution to fix this team, backbone this team for the rest of time behind Scottie Barnes. Like if you're finding a legitimate long-term succession plan at the 5, great. If you're trading with a contender to give Jakob Poeltl give them Jakob Poeltl services, you're probably not getting an ironclad, no doubt long-term succession plan in return. And I'm sorry for the Yves Missi heads out there. If you trade into the Pelicans, Yves Missi is not a viable plan to be your backup center or your starting center long-term. You have to have something more ironclad than that. And I just don't see that. And so trading Jakob Poeltl seems pretty stupid to me. Just don't do it. It seems like an unforced error. I think the Bruce Brown thing, obviously, if they find a way to turn Bruce Brown into a first-round pick, all is forgiven. All is forgotten from not necessarily the Pascal Siakam trade. I'm viewing the two things as very different things now. They're different entities. I still think the Siakam trade sucks. But if you turn Bruce Brown into a first-round pick, great. Everyone's very happy. And I think, the decision to pick up his option is not a bad deal. If they can't move him, if they can't find something for him, if they can't find the salary match or whatever, he's just on the team and walks in the summer, then yeah, that's another one of those mistakes that starts to build up and really make you question how long the runway should be for the front office. There's no doubt. I think they got to keep an eye out for like second draft flyer types still. I think they still got to be kind of mining the perimeter, finding those wins on the margins that they haven't had for the last few years. If I'm the Raptors right now, I'm calling up the Golden State Warriors and asking about Moses Moody, a guy who I think is pretty undervalued by that Warriors team. Seemingly, they can't pay him and Jonathan Kuminga. They're going to have to pay Jonathan Kuminga a whole lot of money. Go see if like Ochai Agbaji and the Blazers second rounder can get you Moses Moody in the door. Little moves like that for guys with upside, I think that's got to be sort of the MO. They got to be smart. They got to be opportunistic. They got to look around at guys who maybe don't have opportunities where they're currently playing that they may be able to have in Toronto to really, take off and find themselves. I think Moses Moody is a guy like that, but it doesn't just have to be Moses Moody. Just like keep an eye out for those types of moves. Find those second draft guys. Find guys on the margins who can help you, who have legit NBA skills. And please, for the love of God, stop trying to sell us on the Jeff Doughtons of the world. Go get real guys with NBA pedigree and see if you can make them work. That's the move here. Ultimately, if the team is competitive and playing decent basketball, a lot of the questions and a lot of the page turning is going to be done by them, right? One or two of the rookies looks like there's something there in them. Jonathan Mobo looks like he's going to be a long-term NBA player. Jamal Shed pops in the second half of the season. These things could all happen to make things feel a little bit better when it comes to what the front office is doing. It kind of vindicates some of their decisions of this past offseason and paints the whole thing in a more positive light going into the future. But of course, these things can all go very wrong, and none of the rookies can look good, and they don't get anything for Bruce Brown, and they get stupid and trade Jakob Poeltl for nothing, and we're sitting here, or not nothing, but like futures and not actual players, and we're sitting here in the summertime with a team that looks even more directionless and is in a lot of trouble, and a front office that probably should have a bit of warmth in their seat. We'll leave it there. I don't know if this episode made any sense. It just felt like I had some stuff to say about the front office, so I hope it was all right. We'll be back again tomorrow. And we're going to have Vivek Jacob back on the show. He's back from his trip to Peru. We'll talk about that, I'm sure. And we'll get into probably a look at swing skills as we pick up an annual series here on the show. and dig into the most important skills that will make or break the seasons and the development of a lot of the guys on the Toronto Raptors. We'll do that coming up tomorrow. Of course, make your second listen of the day Locked in NBA, a great place to go and check out lots of NBA coverage every single day. I was on Monday's Locked in NBA with Jackson Gatlin talking Raptors, so you can go check that out. We will leave it there, though. We'll be back again on Tuesday with Big V. In the meantime, thanks for supporting the show. Wherever you support the show, it's always so appreciated. Thanks for hanging. Bye-bye.